the stage Rob Collier.
I'm not very used to this. I'm used to small rooms with high energy rather than large rooms with smaller energy. So glad you're all listening. We've got a heads up. So just a quick intro to MTM. We're a research and strategy agency based in the UK, but we work globally. A few clients in and around the horse today, so if you see me and you know me, come and say hello. I'm pretty good for names and faces. The question we've been posed, it's been removed from the screens now, but it's I think you've got it in your programs. Will smart TVs replace set-top boxes? So cutting to the chase, nearly, almost entirely. As a rule. So there you go, answer now. You can all leave and go and get coffee if you want to. That's the answer to the presentation. The pitch today, or the kind of what I'm going to talk you through, is just a few observations, a bit of commentary that we have with our clients and with the industry about why we think that's the case, why smart TVs are growing in adoption and in usage, but also what the force is kind of pulling back smart TV adoption. Hopefully interesting, hopefully useful, thought-provoking, and that brings the voice of the consumer to these sessions. So you can take photos as if you like, if you're stats nerds. This is a copy on screen of our in-house forecast for primary set households in the UK. So we characterise TV homes in the UK based on the adoption of people's primary TV set. So the main set in the house, we break that down on the basis of which TV platform they plug into their primary set. And there's a bit of a hierarchy, so if you're a Sky household and you've got Freeview, you would define you as a Sky household and some rules like that. But you can see that the kind of landscape 2018, 2022. Now, the big message that we've got and the kind of analysis that we're doing, partly the part of the smart TV story, is that there's a massive growth in OTT-only households. So that is TVs that aren't plugging into a broadcast mechanism to consume their tellies. So that might be smart TVs, it could be streaming devices, but essentially it's homes that they might have a DT aerial on their house, they might have DSAT capabilities, but they're foregoing that connection type and choosing to run with OTT only. And that really does shift the landscape in terms of viewing choices and in terms of who controls the user interface, which I'm going to come on to. Like I mentioned already, part of this story, part of the reason why people are able to go to kind of an OTT-only choice is because we see smart TVs gaining share rapidly. So in 2018, we reckon that there were 50% of primary sets were smart or smart capable, and that we forecast to grow to 96% by 2032. Now, the question, I guess, an obvious question is, what is driving that growth? And if I go to I'll cover that in a second, but just to highlight some of the changes in viewing behaviour that's causing. So there's two stats here. One is what percentage of VOD requests does TV account for in total? So that's 64% going to 72% for the first half of 2023. And then what share of that does smart TVs represent? So you've got this story of more video on demand going to TV, and within that, more TV video on demand going to smart TVs. So you've got this kind of shift inexorably towards smart TVs. Now, the adoption of smart TVs, it's a very educated room when it comes to smart TV capabilities. I think it's a pretty easy answer. What is driving the adoption of smart TVs is it's basically almost impossible to buy a TV that's not smart. Right, so there's no consumer demand that's driving smart TVs, kind of fundamentally. But the fact is that when you go to the shop and you buy a new telly, it's probably smart, and there's probably good reasons for you to plug it in and use it to watch telly. The other comment that we would make on this, I'm actually quite proud of the exhibit on the left because I did this in 2015, back in the day, and I dug it out for this presentation. And it shows then, when I went through all of these set-top boxes and smart TV platforms in 2015, what the availability of the PSB VOD services were on smart TVs in 2015. And there's actually some quite very significant differences between what services you're able to access depending on what smart TV brand you chose. Whereas now, both for streaming devices and for smart TVs, the content proposition from a user perspective is much, much more uniform. So when you're making TV choices and when you're thinking about what devices you want in the home, there's a much greater range of services, and there's much less differentiation between smart TVs, both within that category, but also why you might want a peripheral or a puck to plug into your TV on top of that. So the answer to the question, what is driving adoption of smart TVs, is fundamentally, it's just basically all you can buy, and there's not really that much of a motivation to go away and buy a peripheral or a puck now versus what there might have been a few years ago. What's really interesting about that about this context, and just something to draw your attention to, and this is how MTM sees the world, is that what this means from a content perspective is that new gatekeepers are emerging when it comes to the way that people discover content and the way that prominence is controlled. So just explain this chart. So if the purple bars are what we're calling traditional TV UIs. This data is a little bit woolly because it all depends on internal definitions and patchy data in places. But essentially what this is showing is that on the top bar, the vast majority of linear viewing is via broadcast EPGs, and that's controlled by traditional TV players. Whereas when you move down to the VOD and video on demand, that share gets much smaller. So the 23% there represents viewing to set-top boxes, or in some cases, some linear EPGs or UIs which are controlled by traditional players. And there's a much greater share of viewing to kind of new TV UIs, i.e. viewing that's going via smart TV interfaces and streaming devices. Now, what that means is that the choices that people have to make are much more driven by people who are a bit more disconnected from a kind of linear viewing experience. And the shift to orange is a shift to players who tend to be more global and tend to have less of a link and less of a kind of a grasp to kind of broadcast viewing. This is just an example of how operators are responding to these trends. So, some of this is a bit of a leap, and I'll explain that. But the first three options you've got here on the screen are what you can buy when you go to EE's website today. So if I'm looking for TV from EE, I can get this All Singing, All Dancing Box Pro, PVR 4 tuners, so I can watch up to 4 DTT signals at a time if I want to, or record 3. I can have the mini box, which is an IP-only set-top box, or I could have EE via Apple TV. You can also cast the EE app to your smart TV if it's Chromecast enabled, and you can also consume EE TV via the app only. The kind of subscription methods there are a bit different, but the leap that I would make is that there's a kind of trend towards a kind of bring your own device strategy in this example. And EE probably not the only operator to be considering that. It's very expensive to have set-top boxes. It's a very expensive kit to give into consumers' homes. And given EE is kind of further and further away from the content game, you can kind of see this story where they're pursuing a bring your own device strategy that doesn't require them to invest very, very heavily in a set-top box kind of ecosystem. And I think that's really important because if you think about all the speakers you've heard this morning about control of the UI, the battleground, etc., and we kind of see this dichotomy where you've got players at scale who have the incentive and the ability to compete over how people discover content, and then you've got other operators which are decoupled from that content game, and they have less to win and less to gain, and they're moving towards a kind of bring your own device strategy, and maybe that favours a kind of move towards smart TVs and peripherals. Now, I said at the beginning, almost entirely, but so here's my kind of the counter argument. Even beyond pay TV, there is still a role for pucks and peripherals in a kind of smart device landscape. So, thank you, Ondi. I know you're in here somewhere. A stat from some of their reports that says that average TV replacement cycle is still 7 years. So people are still replacing their devices. These are expensive. They're trademark. They're kind of showcase devices that you have in your home, and you're not replacing them very often. So that means that when there's services that become newly available, there might be a lag between when you can get something on your main set versus when you might be able to buy a cheaper peripheral to allow you to have that content on your screen. So there's a role for peripherals and pucks definitely there. The other consideration that we would shout out is that we predict that by 2032 there will still be 15% of secondary sets which are dumb, i.e. they're not smart and they don't have the capability to receive IP delivered services directly. And so within that context, there's a huge role for pucks and peripherals, certainly in the next 10 years, to connect secondary sets and give people more usage of IP services across the home rather than just their main screens. So I said at the beginning, will smart TVs replace set-top boxes? Almost entirely, but there you go. Thank you very much, everybody.